Welcome to Bedtime Noir, where shadows whisper and the night holds secrets waiting to be told. Tonight, we journey into the eerie town of Ashford Hollow, a place where tradition hides a darker truth, and every October, 13 souls vanish into the mist. This is the Black Parade, a story of loss, secrets, and the thin line between the living and the forgotten. So settle in, turn down the lights, and let the quiet dread of Ashford Hollow guide you into a deep, restless sleep. Listen closely, and beware the parade. Part 1: Ashford Hollow. The bus hissed, a dying mechanical sigh, as it pulled away from the shoulder of the cracked two-lane road. It coughed a final plume of exhaust into the cold, damp air, leaving Jack Elroy standing alone. His worn leather suitcase, heavy with a week's worth of clothes and a lifetime of cynicism, hung from one hand. In the other, a small, silver-gray digital recorder, his constant companion, felt strangely light. His boots, scuffed and practical, sank slightly into the thick carpet of wet leaves that paved the roadside. Russet, gold, and a deep, bruised brown, the colors of rot, he thought, or perhaps just late autumn. The air, already heavy, smelled of damp earth, distant wood smoke, and something else he couldn't quite place. Something ancient and vaguely metallic, like old pennies left out in the rain. Behind him, a battered green sign tilted precariously, half swallowed by a tangle of thorny overgrowth and skeletal branches. Its paint was peeling, the letters faded by decades of sun and neglect. Welcome to Ashford Hollow, founded 1832, population 1209, keep tradition sacred. Jack clicked his recorder on, the faint whirring sound a comforting, familiar hum in the oppressive silence. October 29th, Jack Elroy, reporting. Time, 11:37 a.m. I've officially arrived in Ashford Hollow. A 3-hour bus ride from the nearest interstate, through what felt like a tunnel of dead trees. Signals already dead, of course. No surprise there. The air smells like firewood and mildew, as expected. But there's something else. A faint, cloying sweetness, like decaying flowers. And something older. Something patient. He paused, adjusting his grip on the suitcase, his gaze sweeping over the desolate landscape. The trees, mostly bare, clawed at the perpetually gray sky, their branches like skeletal fingers. There was no sound of distant traffic, no hum of civilization. Just the whisper of the wind through the dry leaves. The town motto is "Keep tradition sacred." That's usually code for we don't like outsiders and we have secrets. My kind of place, I guess. He offered a dry, humorless chuckle that sounded brittle even to his own ears. The case, Elliot Cross, age 7. Missing since October 16th. Parents refused national media. Which, naturally, made me more interested. They say I have a knack for finding people who aren't looking to be found. Or, more accurately, finding the stories they're trying to bury. He clicked the recorder off, the silence rushing back in, heavier than before. He slipped the device into the inner pocket of his worn tweed coat, the fabric already smelling faintly of dampness. Then, with a sigh that was more resignation than weariness, he started walking. The road wound deeper into the hollow, flanked by dense, skeletal woods. The town revealed itself slowly, grudgingly, as if unsure whether it wanted to be seen at all. Gray clapboard houses, weathered to a uniform, somber shade, leaned into each other like gossiping old women, their windows dark and watchful. Gutters overflowed with damp leaves, the drainpipes choked with moss. Every porch, even the most dilapidated, had a lantern, but not the cheerful, carved Halloween kind. These were old-fashioned, wrought iron, oil-lit, flickering gently in the breeze, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and recede with each gust. He saw no pumpkins, no plastic cobwebs, no cheerful fake skeletons. No sign of the festive season that was just 2 days away. The town square appeared like a carefully constructed stage set, a tableau of quiet desolation. A brick church, its steeple leaning precariously as if bowed by an unseen weight, dominated one side. Across from it, a barber shop with a perpetually closed sign, and a diner with windows so fogged with condensation and grime that they offered no glimpse of the interior. The air here was even heavier, laced with the scent of stale cooking oil and something else, something sharp and metallic, like ozone before a storm. At the very center of the square, where a fountain might have been in a more welcoming town, stood a cast-iron statue. It depicted 13 figures in long, flowing cloaks, their hands folded in what looked like prayer or perhaps supplication. Their faces, if they ever had any, had eroded over time, leaving them eerily blank, smoothed by decades of wind and rain into featureless OV. Jack stopped, his gaze fixed on the statue. He took a step closer, then another, until he was standing directly before it, craning his neck to look up at the unseeing faces. "They don't have faces," he whispered to himself, the words catching in his throat. It wasn't a question, but an observation, a chilling detail that resonated with the unsettling quiet of the town. He reached into his coat again, this time pulling out a crumpled notepad, its pages dog-eared and stained with coffee rings. A name was scribbled there in black ink, stark against the yellowed paper: Elliot Cross, age 7, missing since October 16th. Underneath it, a hastily drawn map, crudely sketched from a phone conversation, showing the general direction of the Cross residence. The Crosses lived in a small, red house on the very edge of town, where the manicured lawns gave way abruptly to untamed woods. The paint on the house was faded, the porch swing creaked rhythmically in the wind, empty. Jack knocked once, a firm rap that echoed in the silence. Then again, louder. After a long, agonizing pause, the door cracked open. A woman, tired-looking and drawn, peered out. Her eyes were dull, rimmed with sleeplessness, but her makeup was fresh, almost too perfect. As if someone had told her to look presentable for company, even in her grief. "Mrs. Cross? I'm Jack Elroy. I called earlier. From the podcast Unsolved Echoes." He held up his hand in a placating gesture. A pause stretched between them, thick with unspoken sorrow. Her fingers tightened on the doorknob, her knuckles white. "I thought I said no." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, like a dead battery. "You did," he admitted, his voice softening slightly. "But I came anyway. I'm not here to exploit, Mrs. Cross. I'm here to listen, to understand, to help if I can." That was mostly true. Jack did want to help, in his own detached, journalistic way. But he also wanted answers. And maybe, just maybe, a story worth recording. A story that could finally silence the echoes in his own mind. She stared at him for another long moment, her jaw working like she was chewing something she didn't want to swallow. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, desperation, perhaps, or a weary resignation. Then, with a barely perceptible sigh, she stepped aside, opening the door wider. Inside, the house smelled like cold toast, burnt candles, and something else, a faint, sweet, cloying aroma, like lilies left too long in a vase. The air was heavy, stagnant. Mr. Cross sat on the floral-patterned couch, motionless, a spectral presence in the dim living room. His eyes were fixed on a blank television screen, reflecting the gray light from the window. He didn't acknowledge Jack at all, didn't even blink. He looked less like a man grieving and more like a man hollowed out. "He just went out to play," Mrs. Cross whispered, her voice barely audible above the faint creak of the house. She wrung her hands, a nervous habit. "Just like always. Right after breakfast. It was sunny that morning. He had his yellow boots on. I told him not to go past the oak tree. That's our rule. He always listened." Her voice broke on the last word. Jack nodded, pulling out his notepad and a pen. He didn't click on his recorder yet. This was a fragile moment, and he didn't want to spook her. "When did you realize he was gone? When he didn't come back for lunch?" Her hands shook, a tremor running through her entire frame. "I called for him. I went to the oak tree. I looked everywhere. The sheriff organized a search. Dogs, volunteers. Nothing. Not a trace." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to erase the memory. Jack leaned forward slightly, his pen poised. Did anyone else see him that day? A neighbor? Someone walking by? No. She hesitated, her gaze darting to the window, then back to Jack. But someone left something on our porch that night. After the search was called off. She stood, her movements stiff and slow, walked to the mantel over the cold fireplace, and returned with a small object cupped in her hands. It was a wooden bird. Roughly carved, almost primitive, from dark, heavy wood. A sparrow, maybe, or some other small, common bird. Its wings, however, were not smooth. They had 13 distinct notches burned into them, dark and precise. We found this on the doorstep, she said, her voice barely a whisper. No note. No explanation. Just this. Jack took the bird from her. The wood felt strangely slick, as if it had been dipped in oil, or perhaps handled by many, many hands over a long time. It was cool to the touch, despite the warmth of the room. He turned it over in his hand, examining the crude craftsmanship and the ominous notches. Did you show this to the sheriff? He took a photo. Said it was probably a prank. Some local kids, he said. She blinked fast, her eyes welling up. But I know what it means. They say if you see the bird, the parade has chosen. Jack frowned, the word catching his attention. The parade? What parade? Her eyes darted to the window again. The sky outside had gone a little darker, the gray deepening to a bruised violet. A shiver ran through her. I've said too much, she whispered, her voice laced with a sudden, palpable fear. She took a step back, her hand reaching for the doorframe. Please, just go. Don't stay past sundown. Not this time of year. It's not safe. Her fear was contagious. Jack felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine, but it was quickly overshadowed by the familiar thrill of the chase. He had found his hook. He thanked Mrs. Cross, leaving his card on the small table by the door, knowing she wouldn't call. He walked back through the quiet streets, the wooden bird still clutched in his hand. The town felt different now, imbued with a new, subtle menace. The silence seemed less peaceful, more watchful. He checked into the Ashford Hollow Inn, a two-story clapboard building that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. Floral wallpaper, faded and peeling, curled from the edges in the dimly lit lobby. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something vaguely medicinal. The front desk was unmanned until he rang a dusty brass bell, its chimes surprisingly loud in the quiet. A woman appeared from a back room, tall, severe, with iron-gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her face was a mask of polite indifference. You'll be in room 7, she said without asking his name, as if she already knew. Her voice was flat, devoid of inflection. We don't offer turn-down service. Breakfast is from 6 to 8. No exceptions. Jack raised an eyebrow, a small, wry smile playing on his lips. Noted. Is there a local paper? Or a library? The Ashford Hollow Gazette ceased publication in 1988. She replied, her gaze unwavering. The library keeps limited hours. You'll find it across from the church. She pushed a heavy brass key across the counter. Room 7. As he climbed the creaking stairs, the wooden steps groaning under his weight, he passed framed photos in the hallway. Black and white portraits of the town's founders, it seemed. Men and women in severe, old-fashioned funeral garb, their expressions uniformly grim, none of them smiling. Their eyes, even in the faded photographs, seemed to follow him. He noticed a recurring motif, a small, almost imperceptible symbol, like a stylized tree or perhaps a gallows, etched into the corner of several frames. Room 7 smelled faintly of lavender and bleach, a sterile scent that did little to mask the underlying mustiness. He dropped his bag on the worn rug, the thud echoing in the small space. He sat on the edge of the bed, its springs groaning in protest, and pulled out his recorder again. Something's wrong here, he murmured into the device. The people look at me like I've tracked mud across a grave. The missing kid isn't the first, the lady at the diner, before she clammed up, said it always happens in the fall. She wouldn't say more. Just that some things are best left alone. I'm starting to think this town isn't running on fear. It's running on something older. Something closer to obedience. A pact, maybe? Or a curse. He clicked it off, the silence amplifying the sudden, faint sound that drifted through the open window. Like bells. Distant, but clear. A slow, mournful peal. 1, 2, 3. He counted, his breath held. 13 chimes. He went to the window, pushing aside the heavy, dust-laden curtains. Nothing but fog and the skeletal trees, their branches swaying gently in an unseen breeze. The air outside felt colder, denser. The bells stopped as abruptly as they began, leaving an unsettling void in their wake. The library was the oldest building in town, aside from the church. Its windows were latticed, the glass uneven and wavy, like it had been melted in the sun. A sign, hand-painted in faded script, read Ashford Hollow Historical Archives, 1832, present. Below that, someone had taped a handwritten note, stark white against the dark wood, closed on October 30th and 31. Do not request exceptions. No admittance after 5 p.m. Jack pushed open the heavy oak door. A faint, sweet scent of old paper and dust filled the air. Inside, it was empty, save for one figure behind the desk. A woman, perhaps mid-30s, with short, dark hair that framed a sharp, intelligent face. Her dark lipstick, a deep plum shade, didn't quite suit her small, knowing smile. She watched Jack approach with an unnerving interest, her eyes dark and perceptive, taking him in. "You're not from here," she said, her voice low and clear, before he even had a chance to speak. It wasn't a question. "Jack Elroy. I'm a podcaster." "I'm looking into the Cross Boy. Thought the archives might help." He offered his most charming, non-threatening smile, the one that usually disarmed nervous interviewees. It didn't seem to work on her. She extended a hand across the polished, but dusty, wooden counter. "Mara Thorne. I'm the caretaker of this mausoleum of mold and forgotten truths." He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, surprisingly strong. Her skin was cool, almost cold. "Elliot Cross," she said, withdrawing her hand. "Yes." "I know the name. The file's been pulled already." Jack's eyebrow went up. "By who?" "I did," she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Figured someone like you might come around. Eventually." She gestured vaguely to the small, cluttered desk. "You're not the first. But you might be the last if you're not careful." She rose from her chair, her movements fluid and quiet, and led him through a maze of towering shelves crammed with ancient, leather-bound tomes. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the stacks, the faint scent of mildew stronger here. They reached a back table, tucked away in a dimly lit corner. A thin, manila folder sat there, already dusty, as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, a single, faded newspaper clipping from 2 weeks ago. "Local boy missing. Sheriff deems ongoing investigation." No updates. No theories. Just the stark, horrifying fact. But underneath it, Jack found something older. A front page dated October 31st, 1974. The headline, printed in bold, stark letters, sent a chill down his spine. 3 children missing, search called off. The wording was almost identical. The layout, eerily similar. Even the sheriff's name, a Mallory, was similar to the current one. "These kids ever found?" Jack asked, his voice low, a knot tightening in his stomach. Mara shook her head slowly, her dark hair swaying. "No. Not ever. And this?" Jack held up the carved bird, which he'd instinctively pocketed after leaving the Cross house. He'd almost forgotten about it until now. "You ever seen anything like it?" She looked at it. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes seemed to deepen, to hold a weight of ancient knowledge. Her voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. "I've seen drawings. In the oldest texts. Not the real thing." They say the birds are left for the chosen. One for each of the 13. 13 what? Jack pressed, his reporter's instinct overriding the growing sense of dread. She glanced at the window. The light had changed again, not dark, exactly, but dimmed. Like someone had pulled a thick, gray shade across the sun, muting the world. The air in the library grew noticeably colder. You don't want to know that, she said, her voice firm, almost a warning. Not yet. Not until you're ready to see it. Back at the inn, Jack sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling fan. It was off, but creaked rhythmically, as if it wanted to move, to spin, to stir the stagnant air. The carved bird, he noticed, was gone from his coat pocket. He patted his pockets frantically, then checked his suitcase. Nothing. It had simply vanished. He checked his watch. 6:47 p.m. The digital display glowed faintly in the dim room. Then he heard it again. The bells. Faint at first, then growing steadily. Not loud. Not frantic. Just steady. 13 chimes. Each one a heavy, mournful toll that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. Then silence. A profound, echoing silence that felt heavier than any sound. He walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out. The town square was empty, bathed in the deepening twilight. The lanterns on porches flickered harder, their light seeming to shrink from the encroaching darkness. Every door was closed, every curtain drawn. The town was holding its breath. He turned on the recorder, his hand shaking slightly. Evening of October 29th, bells just rang 13 times. That number again. 13 figures in the statue. 13 notches on the bird. Everyone's inside. Doors locked. Curtains drawn. It's like they're waiting for something. Or hiding from it. He paused, listening to the oppressive silence, the faint, rhythmic creak of branches overhead. This isn't just a missing kid story anymore. This is something else. He clicked it off. Then something caught his eye, across the square, near the church. A flicker of movement. A shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows. A figure. Tall. Long coat. Wide-brimmed hat. Standing completely still, silhouetted against the dim light from the church's stained glass window. It was too far to make out details, but the impression was clear, an unnatural stillness, a watchful presence. Jack blinked. Rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, it was gone. Vanished into the deepening gloom, leaving only the oppressive silence and the faint, lingering scent of damp earth and something indefinably old. He dreamed of fire that night. A forest burning, the flames a hungry orange against a black sky. Smoke billowed like grasping hands, reaching, twisting. And in the heart of the inferno, a child stood at the edge of the trees, calling his name. Not Elliot Cross. A different child. A younger voice. A voice that wasn't human, but an echo of something long lost. Jack! Jack! When he woke, gasping, the room was cold. A thin layer of fine, gray ash coated the windowsill, despite the window being closed. He ran a finger through it. It felt gritty, like burned paper. And the carved bird was gone from his coat pocket. Again. Part 2, 13 Names. The next morning, October 30th, dawned with a familiar, oppressive gray. Jack Elroy sat in a booth at the Ashford Hollow diner, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed the night before and left to stew. The place was nearly empty, the air thick with the lingering scent of stale grease and forgotten dreams. A vintage jukebox in the corner blinked silently, its colorful lights reflecting dully off the polished chrome. Outside, the fog hadn't lifted. It clung low to the pavement like a living thing, muffling the already quiet town. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers brushing against the empty lining. The carved bird. Gone. Again. He meticulously checked his pockets before bed, even placed it on the nightstand, only to find it missing when he woke. No crack in the wood, no stray chip in his pocket, no sign of forced entry into his room. Just gone. It was as if the bird itself had decided its purpose was served, its message delivered, and then simply dematerialized. A cold prickle of unease, far deeper than simple frustration, crawled up his spine. This wasn't just a prank. This was something else entirely. He played it cool, forcing his hand to remain steady as he pulled out his recorder. The faint whir of the device was a small anchor in the growing strangeness. October 30th, 7:15 a.m. The carved bird has vanished for the second time. I locked the door last night, deadbolt and chain. Either someone picked it with impossible skill, or it walked out on its own. The ash on the windowsill this morning confirms the dream wasn't just a dream. This town is actively trying to keep its secrets, and it's doing so with methods that defy logic. I need to know what this town is hiding. I need a list. Names. Dates. Patterns. Something tangible to hold on to before I start questioning my own sanity. He clicked it off, then looked up as the waitress came over. She was a woman in her late 40s, with tired eyes that seemed to have seen too much and a neck tattoo, a faded, intricate knot design, half hidden by her collar. She refilled his coffee without asking, her movements efficient and practiced. "Anything else, hon?" she asked, her voice flat. "Do you know what the bells mean?" he asked, trying for casual, his gaze fixed on her face. Her hand, holding the coffee pot, paused in midair. A flicker of something, fear? Annoyance? Crossed her features before settling back into a practiced blankness. "We don't talk about that," she said, her voice dropping to a low, almost guttural tone. "Best you don't either. Some things are better left alone." "I'm a journalist," Jack countered, pushing his cup forward slightly. "Or a podcaster these days. I don't do well with silence. Especially when it's this loud." "Then maybe pick a different town," she retorted, setting the pot down harder than necessary, a faint splash of coffee sloshing onto the saucer. She turned abruptly and walked away, her back stiff. Jack stirred his coffee slowly, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. The silence she left behind was indeed loud, filled with unspoken warnings. Behind him, from the kitchen, a radio crackled to life. It played something scratchy, barely music, a mournful, old-fashioned waltz, perhaps. And then, cutting through the tinny melody, a voice, faint and childlike, but unmistakable. "Jack!" He turned around, spilling a little coffee. Nothing but the empty hallway leading to the back of the diner, shrouded in shadow. The radio continued its static-laced tune. He must be hearing things. The lack of sleep, the unsettling atmosphere, the vanishing bird, it was getting to him. He took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady his nerves. He needed answers, and he needed them fast, before this town truly got under his skin. Later that morning, Jack returned to the library. The handwritten note on the door, warning against exceptions and late admittance, seemed to mock him. He pushed open the heavy oak door, the faint, sweet scent of old paper and dust greeting him like a familiar, unsettling perfume. Mara Thorne was already at the desk, her dark head bent over a massive, leather-bound book that looked older than most buildings in Ashford Hollow. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, covered in faded script and strange, intricate illustrations. "You came back," she said, her voice a low murmur, without looking up from the ancient text. "You seem like the only one in this town who won't pretend I'm not here," Jack replied, walking slowly towards the desk, his eyes scanning the shelves filled with forgotten histories. The air in the library felt different today, charged with a subtle energy, as if the very books were humming with secrets. She closed the massive book with a soft thud, sliding it aside. Her dark eyes, intelligent and piercing, met his. "What do you want to know, Jack Elroy? And be specific. Time is running out." "Names," Jack said, leaning against the counter. "Of the missing. Not just Elliot Cross. As many as you can give me. I saw that 1974 clipping. There have to be more." She didn't ask why. She didn't even hesitate. Just rose from her chair, her movements fluid and quiet, and led him through a creaking door tucked away behind a tall bookshelf. The door was marked with a faded, hand-painted sign, "Restricted, Staff Only." The lights flickered as she turned them on, a bare fluorescent bulb buzzing overhead, casting a harsh, clinical glow over the small, windowless room. Rows upon rows of filing cabinets filled the space, each labeled by decade. The air here was even colder, thicker with the scent of old paper and the metallic tang of aged steel. It felt less like an archive and more like a tomb. She pulled open a drawer from the 1970s. The metal shrieked in protest, echoing in the confined space. Then another from the 50s. Her fingers moved quickly, without hesitation, as if she knew the exact location of every file, every forgotten tragedy. Within a few minutes, she laid out 13 thin, manila file folders on the dusty table in the center of the room. Each one looked identical, anonymous. "Don't ask me why it's always 13, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "But it always is. Every time." Jack's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the top file. He opened it. A faded photograph of a smiling girl, perhaps 9 years old, with pigtails and bright, innocent eyes. Elsie Morell, age 9. Vanished October 30th, 1956. He opened the next. Daniel Haskins, 11. Disappeared October 31st, 1969. A boy with a gap-toothed grin and a baseball cap. Then the third file. His breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Matthew K. Elroy. Age 12. Vanished October 30th, 1992. His last name. His brother's name. Jack froze, the blood draining from his face. He stared at the words, then at the photo clipped to the file. A school photo, wide grin, crooked teeth, a shock of dark hair falling over one eye. It was Matt. His younger brother. Unmistakably him. "No," Jack whispered, the word a raw, guttural sound torn from his throat. He shook his head, denial a suffocating wave. "No, Matt died. He jumped off the railroad bridge. I was there. I saw it." Mara watched him quietly, her dark eyes unblinking, filled with a profound, ancient sorrow. "There was never a body, Jack." Jack backed away from the table, bumping into a filing cabinet, the metal clanging loudly. "I was there. I saw the jacket. His backpack. He left a note. A suicide note. It was all over the news. They dragged the river for days. They found nothing, but everyone knew." His voice was rising, bordering on frantic. Mara nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "They dragged the river. They found nothing. Because he wasn't in the river, Jack. He was here. Or rather, he was taken from here. He was visiting a friend, just outside of town. He vanished on October 30th. The same day as the others. The same day as it always begins." "You're telling me the parade took him?" The words felt alien on his tongue, a nightmare made real. "I'm telling you, Ashford Hollow has taken 13 children every generation," Mara said, her voice soft but firm, cutting through his rising panic. "Every 20 to 30 years, the count completes. And every time, the town forgets. Or pretends to forget. Except the ones who remember too late. The ones who are left behind to pick up the pieces, or to become the next watcher." Jack stumbled back, his legs giving out. He sat down hard in the nearest chair, a rickety wooden thing that groaned under his weight. His mouth was dry, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The air in the room felt thin, suffocating. "Why?" he choked out. "Why do people let this happen? Why don't they fight back? Why don't they leave?" Mara sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "They did. Once. They tried to fight back. And they paid a terrible price." She walked to another cabinet, pulling out a drawer marked 1950 to 1959. She pulled out a single, brittle folder and laid it on the table. "Back in 1952, Mara explained, the town held a vote. A desperate, misguided attempt to break free. No more parades. No more traditions. No more silence. The mayor at the time, a firebrand named Thomas Albright, had rallied the townspeople, promising an end to the ancient dread that hung over Ashford Hollow. He tried to outlaw the march, to forbid any gathering on Halloween night. He even brought in state police, though they found nothing amiss and left, baffled by the town's strange anxieties. That year, on the night of October 30th, all 13 children came from the families who had voted to stop it. Every single one. And the town, terrified and broken, buried the story under fire and soot, a desperate attempt to erase the evidence of their defiance. They blamed it on an orphanage fire, Mara said, her voice flat. A faulty furnace, they claimed. Except there was no orphanage in Ashford Hollow. Not here. Not ever. It was a convenient lie, a collective delusion they forced themselves to believe to survive. She handed Jack a faded, singed newspaper clipping, its edges brittle and crumbling. The headline, stark and chilling, screamed, 13 dead in Ashford Hollow blaze, faulty furnace cited. The photo below it showed 13 small coffins, lined up outside the church, their dark wood stark against the gray sky. The headline made no mention of the children's names, no mention of their families. Just the number. 13. They held the funeral the day after Halloween. Mara continued, her voice devoid of emotion, as if reciting a well-worn, painful liturgy. With an empty parade that year. Just to be safe. To show the hollow they understood. That they wouldn't defy it again. Jack stared at the image, his mind reeling. 13 coffins. 13 children. His brother. It was all connected. He looked closer at the photograph. In the background, just inside the dark archway of the church doors, a figure stood. Tall. Cloaked. A wide-brimmed hat obscured its face, casting it in deep shadow. It was barely visible, a ghostly presence at the edge of the frame. He leaned in closer, his finger tracing the outline of the spectral figure. Who is that? No one remembers, Mara said, her voice barely a whisper. Or no one admits to remembering. But I've seen him too. In other old photographs. In the margins of forgotten journals. Always there. Always watching. The revelation about Matt hit Jack with the force of a physical blow. His brother wasn't dead by his own hand. He had been taken. A victim of this town's monstrous tradition. The guilt he had carried for so long, the crushing weight of believing he had failed Matt, shifted, transformed into a burning, desperate rage. He had to understand. He had to stop it. Later that afternoon, Jack walked to the sheriff's office. The Ashford Hollow Sheriff's Office was little more than a 3-room building with wood-paneled walls and a single holding cell visible through a barred window. The air inside smelled of stale coffee, old paper, and a faint, metallic scent he couldn't quite place. Sheriff Dane Mallory sat behind a battered desk, chewing on a toothpick, his gaze fixed on last week's paper. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed perpetually tired. He didn't look up when Jack entered, didn't acknowledge his presence beyond a slight stiffening of his posture. Should have left yesterday, Elroy, Mallory said flatly, his voice a low rumble, still chewing on the toothpick. I've got questions, Sheriff, Jack said, pulling out the file on Elliot Cross, then the faded newspaper clipping about the 1974 disappearances. He laid them on the desk. And I think you've got answers. Mallory took the folders, thumbed through them without emotion, his gaze lingering on the old newspaper. He didn't meet Jack's eyes. You're stirring things best left still, Elroy, he warned, his voice low and dangerous. This town has its ways. It's been that way for a long time. You remember my brother Matthew Elroy? Jack pressed, his voice tight. Mallory looked up slowly, his eyes, the color of gunmetal, finally meeting Jack's. A flicker of something, recognition? Pain? Crossed his face. Name rings a bell. From, what was it? The railroad bridge? His file was in the town archives. Jack stated, ignoring the bait. with 12 others. Going back decades. Always in October. Always 13. And he wasn't the only one from outside Ashford Hollow. The sheriff leaned back in his creaking chair, sighing, the toothpick snapping between his teeth. He tossed the pieces into a small, overflowing wastebasket. I was 10 when the parade took my cousin, Mallory said, his voice softer now, almost a confession. Her name was Margaret. She was a year younger than me. We were supposed to walk together that night, Halloween. We were playing hide-and-seek near the church. She let go of my hand near the edge of the woods. Said she saw someone in the trees. Someone waving to her. She followed them in. Never came back. His eyes were distant, haunted by a memory he couldn't shake. Jack pulled up a worn wooden chair and sat down, leaning forward. Why do you let it happen, Sheriff? Why don't you stop it? Mallory looked him dead in the eye, his gaze unwavering. Because we don't have a choice, Elroy. This town, it demands its due. Always has. Always will. We tried to fight it once. It nearly wiped us out. Better to lose 13 every generation than to lose everyone. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window, where the silver light of the dying afternoon filtered through the dusty panes. You're an outsider. You don't understand the weight of it. The fear. The obedience. Obedience to what? Jack pressed. Mallory just shook his head, a weary, defeated gesture. You'll see. If you stay. Outside, the wind picked up, swirling through the narrow streets. Leaves, dry and brittle, swirled across the pavement in looping spirals, dancing a macabre jig. The sky had gone a strange shade of silver, not cloudy, not clear, but a muted, ethereal light. A sun without warmth hovered like an eye half-lidded in sleep, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched and crawled like living things. Jack stood on the church steps, his gaze fixed on the iron statue in the square. 13 figures, cloaked, faceless. They seemed to watch him, their empty eye sockets holding all the town's secrets. He felt a profound sense of wrongness, a deep-seated dread that permeated the very air. A boy passed him on a bicycle, maybe 9 years old, with bright red hair and freckles. He didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just stared ahead, his face unnervingly blank, as if he hadn't seen Jack at all. Or perhaps, as if he had seen him and simply chosen not to acknowledge him. Jack called out, a sudden impulse seizing him. Hey, kid, wait up! The boy didn't stop. Didn't even slow down. He just continued pedaling, his small figure disappearing down a narrow alley between two leaning buildings. Jack, driven by a sudden, inexplicable urgency, followed him. The alley was dark, smelling of stale garbage, damp cardboard, and the faint, metallic hum of unseen insects. The walls of the buildings were grimy, covered in peeling paint and patches of moss. Then the boy turned the corner and vanished. When Jack reached the end of the alley, there was nothing there but a dead-end brick wall, stained with grime and moisture. No other exit. No sign of the boy. It was as if he had simply dissolved into the air. And on the bricks, scrawled in charcoal black letters, stark against the faded red, do not watch the parade. Do not join the line. Do not look at their faces. He reached for his recorder, clicked it on, his fingers fumbling slightly. Warning scrawled behind the town hall. No signature. No date. But it was fresh. Still smelled like burnt matches. And the kid, he just vanished. This town is playing games with me. Or something in this town is. A rustling noise behind him. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. He spun around, heart hammering against his ribs. The alley was empty. Except a carved bird sat on top of an overflowing trash bin, its dark wood stark against the faded green plastic. It was the same bird. The one that had vanished from his pocket. Its wings now had 2 new notches. 13. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of the bed in room 7, lights off, eyes fixed on the window. The moon, a sliver of bone-white light, struggled to pierce the thick, swirling fog outside. Every creak of the old inn, every whisper of the wind, sounded amplified, sinister. He felt a profound sense of being watched, a cold, unseen presence that permeated the very walls. The bells rang again. 13 chimes. Slow. Deliberate. Each toll a hammer blow against the silence. And then, footsteps. Soft. Measured. Rhythmic. Coming from the direction of the church. A slow, steady march. He peeked through the curtain, his breath held tight in his chest. There, walking across the square, was a line of figures. 13 of them. Cloaked. Hooded. Each holding a lantern that cast a faint, flickering glow on the damp cobblestones. They moved without sound, without hesitation, their forms blurring slightly in the fog, moving toward the churchyard, then towards the dark maw of the woods beyond. And one of them, the fifth in line, turned slightly. Just enough for Jack to see a face. His breath caught in his throat, a gasp that was half scream. It was his brother. Matt. Pale. Hollow-eyed. His features gaunt, almost skeletal, but unmistakably him. Older now than when he had vanished, his face a chilling echo of Jack's own, a distorted reflection of what he might have become. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a primal urge to scream, to run, to deny what his eyes were seeing. But he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He fumbled with the window latch, throwing it open. The cold, damp air rushed in, smelling of wet earth and something acrid, like burned offerings. "Matt!" he croaked, his voice raw, barely a whisper. No response. The figure continued its slow, dreamlike march, its pace unwavering. The Black Parade. It wasn't a legend. It was real. And his brother was part of it. Jack grabbed his coat, his mind a whirlwind of terror and desperate resolve. He had to follow. He had to know. He ran down the creaking stairs, past the unmanned front desk, the dusty brass bell silent, and burst out into the night. The cold bit at his skin like teeth, a sharp, invigorating shock that cut through the haze of shock. The air smelled of smoke and wet leaves, and something else, the faint, sweet scent of decaying flowers, stronger now. By the time he reached the square, the figures were already disappearing into the dense, skeletal woods beyond the church. Their lanterns, 13 small points of light, receded into the impenetrable darkness. He followed. He had to. For Matt. For himself. He had to know the truth, no matter how horrifying. He had to break this cycle. Or die trying. Part 3, Parade Night. The forest welcomed Jack like a mouth would a scream, wide, dark, and utterly consuming. The trees pressed close, thick-trunked and brittle-limbed, their bark split and weeping a viscous, dark sap that glowed faintly in the oppressive dark, like veins pulsing beneath ancient, gnarled skin. The air, already heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, grew colder with every step, a chill that sank into his bones, far deeper than the late October night should allow. Leaves, dry and skeletal, crackled under his boots, the only sound in a night too still, too silent. Ahead, the lanterns bobbed between the branches, 13, always 13, moving in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Their light was weak, barely piercing the gloom, but it was enough to guide him, a series of spectral beacons drawing him deeper into the heart of the woods. Jack didn't call out again. His throat still burned from shouting his brother's name back in the town square. It hadn't mattered. The figures in the parade never looked back, never acknowledged his presence. Except Matt. Just once. Just enough to pull Jack from the relative safety of the town and into this dead wood, this place where the very air felt wrong. The deeper he went, the colder it became. Not windchill cold, more like an absence. As if warmth had been forgotten here long ago, banished by some ancient, consuming force. As if the trees themselves were trying to remember the feeling of sunlight and failing, their branches reaching, grasping, for something that was no longer there. The ground grew softer, muddier, his boots sinking with a squelching sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the profound silence. He fumbled with his recorder, his fingers clumsy with cold and a mounting terror. He clicked it on, the faint whirring sound a desperate comfort. October 30th, past midnight. Following the black parade into the woods. No trails. No sound but my own breathing, and the crunch of leaves. Saw my brother, Matthew, in the procession. He's older now than when he vanished. Looks like me. Or like I used to. This is wrong. All of it. The air is freezing. The trees, they feel alive, but not in a good way. Like they're watching. Like they're waiting. He paused, listening to the oppressive silence, the faint, rhythmic creak of branches overhead. I don't know where they're going, but I have to follow. I have to know. He clicked it off, the sudden silence amplifying the low hum that now seemed to pass through the very ground beneath his feet. It wasn't a sound, not exactly, more like a pressure, a deep vibration, like the earth itself exhaling a slow, ancient breath. Something vast and not quite asleep, stirring beneath the surface. The lanterns were farther now, almost gone, swallowed by the dense foliage. Jack moved faster, pushing through thorny bushes that snagged his coat, stumbling over gnarled roots that snaked across the forest floor like grasping fingers. He could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent woods. Then something shifted behind him. A faint rustle, too distinct to be just the wind. He spun, his eyes darting into the impenetrable shadows. Nothing. Just deeper darkness. But he felt it, a presence, cold and watchful, just beyond the reach of his sight. And there, under a fallen log, half buried in damp leaves, another carved bird. Smaller than the one he'd found at the cross house, but unmistakable. Its dark would seem to absorb the meager light, and its wings had 13 distinct notches, burned deep into the grain. It was watching him. Its blank, wooden eyes seemed to bore into his very soul. He left it behind. He couldn't bring himself to touch it, to acknowledge its silent message. He pushed forward, the image of Matt's hollow face burning in his mind, overriding the growing dread. The trees abruptly opened into a clearing. It was a wide circle of earth, bare and scorched black, as if a massive, ancient fire had raged here, consuming everything down to the very soil. No grass grew, no leaves lay on the ground. Just dark, compacted earth. In its center stood a stone altar, old and cracked, its surface stained with what looked like dried, dark blood. Around it, arranged in a perfect, silent circle, the procession. 13 figures in antique mourning cloaks, their hoods pulled low, obscuring their faces. 13 lanterns flickering like dying stars, casting long, dancing shadows that writhed and twisted on the scorched earth. Jack crouched behind a dead stump at the edge of the clearing, its wood brittle and crumbling to the touch. He watched, his breath held, his entire body rigid with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. They did not speak, did not chant, did not move. Just stood there, utterly still, as if waiting. Waiting for something, or someone. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic thumping of his own heart. And then, from the trees opposite him, someone else entered the clearing. A child. No, not a child. A man. Thin. Disheveled. His clothes torn, his face streaked with dirt and tears. He was barefoot, his feet bruised and bleeding from the rough terrain. His eyes were wide and blank, staring into nothingness, yet filled with an unbearable terror. He stumbled forward, stopped at the edge of the circle, then raised both hands as if in surrender, or desperate supplication. Jack squinted, a cold wave washing over him. It was Sheriff Dane Mallory. And he was crying. Silent, desperate tears streaking through the dirt on his face. His body shook with uncontrollable tremors. No! The sheriff choked out, his voice raw, barely a whisper. No, not me. Please, I've served. I've kept the line. I've kept the rules. I did what you asked? His plea was desperate, pathetic. echoing in the unnatural stillness of the clearing. One of the cloaked figures, the one standing directly opposite Mallory, stepped forward. Its movements were slow, deliberate, almost graceful. The lantern in their hand dimmed, its light shrinking to a pinprick. Then, with a gesture that was both ancient and chillingly familiar, they reached up and removed their hood. Jack's breath froze in his throat. His blood ran cold. It was Mara Thorne. Her face, usually sharp and intelligent, was now flat, almost serene. Her eyes, dark and knowing, held no emotion, no recognition. They seemed to look through Mallory, through Jack, into some distant, unknowable void. "I'm sorry, Dane," she said, her voice a low, melodic murmur, devoid of compassion. "The pact holds. It always holds. You knew this day would come." Mallory's eyes widened in despair. He turned to run, a desperate, animalistic cry tearing from his throat. But another figure, impossibly fast, moved from the circle and grabbed him by the shoulders. Its grip was iron, inescapable. There was no struggle. No fight. Only a single, choked, terrified sound from Mallory, a sound that was abruptly cut off. Then they dragged him to the altar. The 13 lanterns flared white, blindingly bright, casting stark, dancing shadows that writhed and twisted across the clearing. The light was cold, piercing, like 1,000 frozen needles piercing his eyes. Jack shielded his face with his arm, the sudden intensity overwhelming his senses. He heard a faint, guttural whisper, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a language older than words. When he looked again, his eyes slowly adjusting to the lingering afterimage of the light, the altar was empty. And so was the parade. Gone. No footsteps. No lanterns. No bodies. No trace of the figures, or of Sheriff Mallory. Only a faint, lingering scent of ozone and something burnt, like distant ash, and on the scorched earth, in the exact spot where each figure had stood, a small, dark imprint in the shape of 13 shoes. He didn't remember walking back. One moment he stood in the clearing, heart hammering, mind reeling from the impossible horror he had just witnessed. The next, he was outside the Ashford Hollow Inn, his shoes soaked with dew, his hands scraped raw from bark and thorns, his coat torn. The sky was a pale, bruised purple, the first hint of dawn. He had no memory of the journey, no recollection of navigating the dark, treacherous woods. It was as if he had simply been transported. His room looked undisturbed, the bed still made, the windows still open, letting in the cold, damp air. As if he hadn't been gone at all. As if the nightmare in the woods had been a hallucination. But on the small, dusty desk sat a note. Handwritten in old, faded ink, the script elegant but unsettling. "We all serve the parade, whether we walk in it or watch it go by. Tonight you did both. Be ready tomorrow." Underneath it, a carved bird. Its dark wood felt slick beneath his trembling fingers. Its wings had 12 notches. The town was quieter than ever the next morning. October 31st, Halloween. But there was no festive atmosphere, no excited chatter. Just a profound, unsettling hush. No sheriff. No explanation for his sudden disappearance. No one even seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't speak of it. The few townsfolk Jack saw on the street averted their eyes, quickening their pace. He visited the diner again, hoping to corner the waitress, but she wasn't there. No one was. The place was locked, the windows dark, a closed sign hanging crookedly. Even the library was closed, the handwritten note on the door stark and ominous. Closed October 31st. Observance in effect do not disturb the sleepers. He wandered back toward the town square, drawn by an irresistible, morbid curiosity. The statue stood just as before. 13 faceless figures, cloaked, silent, eternally watchful. Only now, one of them looked slightly different. Jack stepped closer, his heart seizing in his chest. The fifth figure, the one his brother had matched in the parade, the one that had stood opposite Mallory, now had a small, almost imperceptible chip in the cloak, just below its featureless neck. And through the chip, a faint glint of metal. a sheriff's badge. He stumbled back, a choked gasp escaping his lips. It was happening in real time. The parade wasn't just a ritual, it was a ledger. A recording. A changing truth. The town wasn't just forgetting. It was actively rewriting itself, absorbing its victims into its very fabric. He was watching the town consume its own. Back in his room, Jack sat on the bed, recorder in hand. The weight of what he'd seen pressed on his chest like a stone, suffocating him. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible, the horrifying reality of Ashford Hollow. October 31st. Last day. Halloween. I don't know what they'll do tonight. But I know someone has to stop it. This town is feeding something. And it's hungry again. Mallory, he's gone. Absorbed. Just like the others. Just like Matt. He paused, his voice thick with a mixture of despair and grim resolve. They think I belong here now. That I'm part of the count. They left me the 12th bird. Which means they still need one more. The 13th. And I know who it's going to be. He clicked the recorder off, the finality of the sound echoing in the silent room. And then he noticed the reflection. In the dusty mirror above the dresser, his face looked pale. Drawn. His eyes wide, haunted. And just behind him, a figure in a long coat, a wide-brimmed hat, its face obscured by shadow. Standing utterly still. He turned fast, a desperate, primal cry caught in his throat. Nothing. The room was empty. The reflection in the mirror was just his own, distorted by the old glass. But on the bed, beside him, another note. This one was written in blood. Dark, viscous, still faintly wet. The script was the same elegant, unsettling hand as the previous note. You walked the woods. You saw the altar. You know the rules. Tonight, the 13th must walk. Will it be you? Or will you choose another? Jack stared at the words, his blood running cold. There was a red fingerprint at the bottom. Small. Distinct. And he knew, without question, it was his brother's. A final, horrifying message from beyond the veil. Night fell faster on Halloween. The sky, already a bruised purple, deepened to an inky black by 6 p.m. The town square was already deserted. No kids in costumes. No candy. Just shuttered windows and dim porch lanterns, casting feeble pools of light that seemed to shrink from the encroaching darkness. The wind howled through the bare trees, a mournful, keening sound. Jack walked alone to the church, his footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the cobblestones. He carried nothing but his recorder, a small, cold comfort in his pocket. He felt a strange calm settling over him, a grim acceptance of the inevitable. Mara was waiting on the steps. She wore the cloak now. The same antique mourning clothes as the figures in the parade. The same as the statue in the square. Her face was serene, almost beautiful in the dim light, but her eyes held that same ancient, knowing sorrow he had seen in the library. You knew it would come to this, Jack said, his voice flat, devoid of accusation. I've always known, she replied, her voice a low murmur, barely audible above the wind. Just as I knew you would come. Just as I knew you would follow. I saw you in the parade, Jack stated, the memory of her unhooded face at the altar still vivid, chilling. She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. I've always been in it. But not always walking. Sometimes watching. Sometimes choosing. My family has been the watchers for generations. It's a duty. A burden. Who chooses tonight? Jack asked, his gaze fixed on her. She looked past him, toward the dark maw of the woods, where the first faint glimmer of lanterns was already visible. That's up to you, Jack Elroy. The Hollow has made its demand. The 13th must walk. And you are the last one chosen. Part 4, The Hollowing. Jack and Mara walked together into the woods. Neither spoke. The wind, which had howled through the town, died down to a faint, mournful whisper among the skeletal branches overhead. The air grew colder, denser, imbued with a profound, unnatural quiet that pressed in on Jack from all sides. He could hear the frantic pounding of his own heart, the rasp of his breath in his throat, amplified in the oppressive stillness. His mind raced, a whirlwind of terror, grief, and a grim, dawning understanding. The blood note, the chilling fingerprint, the image of Matt's hollow face in the parade, they all converged into a single, inescapable truth. He was the 13th. The final piece of the puzzle. The one who would complete the count. The weight of that realization settled on him like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. The trees welcomed them in silence. The same dead-limbed canopy as before, draped in fog and time. But now, as they moved deeper, the woods seemed to shift, to become more ancient, more menacing. The gnarled roots that snaked across the forest floor felt like grasping fingers. The weeping sap on the bark glowed with a more intense, sickly luminescence. Lanterns flickered in the distance again, a hypnotic, rhythmic dance, moving toward the altar clearing like they had every night, every year, for who knows how long. But tonight, Jack was not merely following. He was part of it. At least, that's what they wanted. And a part of him, a dark, desperate part, was beginning to accept it. Ahead, the clearing glowed faintly, not with warmth, but with a cold, ethereal light, like coals under ashes, or phosphorescence on a forgotten grave. Mara stepped lightly, her dark cloak dragging over the wet, black leaves, her movements fluid and unhurried. Jack followed behind her, his boots sinking into the soft, damp earth, unsure if he was still deciding his fate, or if the decision had already been made for him, long before he ever stepped off that bus. Finally, Mara spoke, her voice a low, melodic murmur that seemed to blend with the rustling of the leaves. "The hollowing is what we call it. Not the ritual, not the sacrifice. Not even the parade. The hollowing." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the ancient trees that pressed in around them, their branches like skeletal arms reaching for the bruised sky. "It's not just the town, Jack. It's the land. The soil. The trees. This whole place remembers blood. It breathes it. It demands it." Jack looked around them, a shiver running through him. These woods feel wrong. Like they're watching. "They are," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They weren't always. Once, this was just another forest. A wild, untamed place. But when the first 13 settlers died here, starved, lost, scared, desperate, they made a promise. Or maybe they were tricked. The oldest texts are vague on the specifics. Either way, something heard them. Something ancient and hungry that lay dormant beneath the soil, waiting. It offered them survival. Prosperity. A town that would thrive where others failed. What kind of promise?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. The air grew colder, and he could feel the presence of something vast and unseen, pressing in on him. Mara stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes, dark and fathomless, seemed to hold the weight of centuries. That if the town was allowed to live, to flourish, it would always feed the hollow. 13 souls, every generation. Voluntary or not. A tithe. A payment. A renewal. Jack laughed once, a harsh, bitter sound that was quickly swallowed by the silence. "No one volunteers for this, Mara. No one. Some do," she said softly, her gaze distant, as if she were looking back through time. "Eventually. When the fear of the alternative becomes too great. When the weight of their own choices becomes unbearable. Or when they simply understand." They reached the clearing. This time, the altar wasn't empty. A figure stood there, cloaked like the others, its hood pulled low, but this one held no lantern. Just a small, intricately carved wooden box, dark and polished, clutched in its hands. As Jack stepped closer, the figure turned slowly, its movements fluid and unhurried. It was a girl. Perhaps 20. Her face was pale, almost translucent, but her features were delicate, beautiful. Her eyes, however, were wide and blank, staring into nothingness, yet holding a profound, unsettling serenity. She stood utterly still, a silent sentinel. Mara whispered, Her name was Lydia. Lydia Vance. She took my place last year. My family has been the Watchers for generations, the ones who guide the chosen, who ensure the pact is kept. It was my turn to walk. But Lydia, she came to me. She was tired of the fear, of the waiting. She said she understood. She said she would walk willingly. Mara's voice was devoid of judgment, only a quiet, weary acceptance. I told her she didn't have to. I told her the burden was mine. She didn't listen. Jack stared at Lydia's face. Calm. Hollow-eyed. Like she'd accepted something he couldn't possibly understand, a peace that transcended terror. It was a chilling thought, that someone could choose this. Why not end it? Jack asked, his voice raw with frustration and a desperate hope. Why not burn the woods? Leave town. Break the pact. Let it all die. Mara smiled then, a faint, unsettling curve of her lips. Not kindly, but with a profound, ancient sadness. They tried, Jack. In 1927, the town had grown restless. A group of young men, fueled by defiance and a desperate hope, decided to break the cycle. They gathered every flammable thing they could find. On October 29th, they set the whole forest ablaze. The flames roared for 3 days, a beacon of defiance against the hollow. The sky was black with smoke, the air thick with ash. The town cheered. They thought they had won. She paused, her gaze fixed on the scorched earth of the clearing. On the third day, Halloween night, the fire reversed. It didn't just stop. It turned. It burned the town instead. From the inside out. Houses spontaneously combusted, flames erupting from within the walls, from beneath the floorboards. People woke to their homes alight around them. There was no escape. Every house but one was consumed. Jack swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Let me guess. The church? Mara nodded. The church. It stood untouched. A monument to the pact. That's where the pact lives now, Jack. It's the heart of the Hollow's power in this place. The conduit. She pointed toward the center of the clearing. There, the 13 lanterns had been arranged in a perfect circle, their cold, white light flickering. In the middle, a single unlit lantern waited. Dark wood, worn smooth by countless hands. Its wick was dry, but ready. For the 13th, Mara said, her voice soft but firm. And tonight you choose. The Hollow demands its due. And you are the last one chosen. Jack sat heavily on a fallen log near the edge of the clearing. The wood felt cold and damp beneath him. The parade had paused now, the figures utterly still, watching him, their unseen eyes boring into his very soul. The lanterns glowed low, humming faintly, a sound that resonated deep within his chest. Mara stood beside him, silent, respectful, a dark, cloaked sentinel. He pulled out his recorder, his hand trembling slightly. He had to document this. He had to leave a record, however futile. October 31st. I've reached the center. The truth. There's no easy way out. Either I take the 13th place, or the cycle continues, and someone else disappears. Maybe another kid. Maybe someone who thinks they're safe. Someone who hasn't been chosen yet. He paused, his voice thick with a mixture of despair and a grim, dawning understanding. My brother! If he's really part of this, if he's walking with them, then maybe I belong here too. Maybe this is the only way to truly be with him. To understand what happened. His hand shook as he clicked it off. The silence that followed was immense, crushing. Then he looked up, and saw a face across the clearing. Matt. Not cloaked. Not hooded. Just standing there, at the edge of the circle of lanterns, in the same faded jeans and flannel jacket he'd worn the day he disappeared. His face was older now, gaunt, pale, but unmistakably him. His eyes, once bright and full of mischief, were now wide and filled with a quiet, impossible pleading. Jack stood, his legs unsteady. Matt? He whispered, the name a desperate prayer. The wind picked up, swirling leaves around them. The trees moaned, a low, guttural sound. Matt opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, he raised one hand, slow and deliberate, and pointed. Not at Jack. At the altar. At the unlit lantern. Mara stepped forward, her voice calm, low, a priestess presiding over an ancient rite. This is the moment, Jack. Every generation has one who understands. Who sees the cost and chooses to pay it. Who steps into the darkness to keep the light from extinguishing completely. Jack looked down at his hands. Dirt-streaked. Trembling. He thought of Elliot Cross, of Elsie Morell, of Daniel Haskins. Of all the nameless children, all the forgotten lives. He thought of his parents, living with the lie of Matt's suicide. He thought of the town, perpetually trapped in its cycle of fear and obedience. What if I light it? He asked, his voice cracking, barely audible. What happens to me? You walk, she said, her gaze fixed on the unlit lantern. With them. Not gone. Not dead. Not exactly. But not part of the world anymore. You become part of the procession. A guardian. A keeper of the pact. Jack's voice was a ragged whisper. What about Matt? If I join, will he be free? Mara looked at him gently, a rare flicker of compassion in her eyes. He walks too. He has been walking since he was taken. And maybe if you walk with him, maybe you won't be alone. Maybe he won't be alone either. Jack stared at the lantern. It was carved from dark, ancient wood, the handle worn smooth from centuries of use, from countless hands like his own. The wick inside was dry, but ready. A single, final match rested in his palm. He knelt. Took out the match. His fingers didn't shake. Not anymore. A strange, serene resolve settled over him. He struck it once, the tiny flare of light impossibly bright in the gloom, and lit the lantern. Light flared. Not fire. Something colder. Pale white and endless, expanding outwards from the lantern, consuming everything. The woods vanished. The trees melted into mist, dissolving into a swirling vortex of gray and white. The ground beneath him ceased to exist. And one by one, the 12 cloaked figures stepped forward and raised their lanterns. Their light, once dim, now burned with the same cold, endless white as Jack's. The 13th now lit. Complete. The circle closed around him. And they began to walk. Jack joined the line. He felt the weight of silence settle around him like a shroud, a profound, all-encompassing quiet that was neither fear nor peace, but something in between. A timeless, endless state of being. He was no longer Jack Elroy, the cynical reporter. He was a part of the parade. A keeper. A guardian. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Matt walked beside him, his face no longer hollow, but serene, a faint, ethereal glow emanating from him. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. The hollow had what it came for. Back in town, Mara Thorne stood alone in the square, the cold wind whipping her cloak around her. The iron statue now showed 13 figures again. And the face of the newest figure, the one that had replaced Sheriff Mallory, bore a subtle, unmistakable resemblance to Jack Elroy. His features softened by the erosion of time, but his essence, his quiet resolve, still visible. The parade was over. Until next time. Part 5, The Last Watcher. 1 week later. The persistent, bruised purple sky still hung low over Ashford Hollow, but a strange, almost palpable quiet had settled over the town. It was the hush that followed a storm, or perhaps a fever. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but merely the absence of sound, a holding of breath. The air, though still damp and cold, carried less of the acrid, burnt scent, replaced by the familiar aroma of wood smoke and damp leaves. No one had asked where Jack Elroy went. The innkeeper, when pressed by a curious traveling salesman who stopped for a night, had only shrugged, her iron-gray bun unmoving. Some folks leave, she'd said, her voice flat, her eyes as blank as the statue in the square. Some just fade. It was the accepted truth, the convenient narrative that Ashford Hollow clung to, a collective amnesia that served as its shield. But Mara Thorne knew. She stood at the edge of Ashford Hollow Cemetery, a small, old-fashioned lantern in her hand, its oil-lit flame casting a flickering circle of light on the rain-soaked ground. The earth was dark, rich, and wet from last night's incessant rain, clinging to the soles of her practical boots. The trees, now completely bare, their branches stripped clean by the relentless autumn wind, rattled gently, a dry, whispery sound like bones in a drum, or the distant murmur of a forgotten language. The line had walked. The 13th lantern had burned. And the hollow was quiet again. For now. She walked between headstones that no longer bore names, just symbols, spirals, slashes, the occasional crude carving of a bird. These were the oldest graves, the ones whose stories had been deliberately erased, their identities absorbed by the land itself. All records older than 1900 had been moved, buried deeper in the archives, or simply burned in the Great Fire of 1927. There were truths that needed forgetting, truths too dangerous to remember. And some truths that didn't care whether you remembered them or not, they simply were. Her family, the Thorns, had been the watchers since the very first settlers had made their desperate pact with the Hollow. It was a lineage of quiet observation, of grim duty, of ensuring the count was kept. They were the town's memory keepers, the silent chroniclers of its monstrous bargain. It was a burden passed down from mother to daughter, a secret held close, a truth that could never be spoken aloud, only acted upon. Inside the church, the air was colder than the wind outside, a chill that seemed to emanate from the very stones. The heavy oak door creaked shut behind her, plunging the interior into near darkness, save for the faint light from her lantern. The pews were dust-covered, warped by time and moisture, there were groaning softly under the weight of forgotten sermons. Only the center aisle remained clear, swept clean every October, a narrow path leading nowhere but the altar, the conduit, the heart of the pact. Mara knelt beside the altar, her movements practiced, almost ritualistic. Her fingers, long and slender, traced the ancient carvings on the stone. She reached into a compartment hidden beneath the altar, a secret space known only to the watchers. From it, she pulled out a heavy, leather-bound volume, the Book of the Hollow. Its cover was dark, almost black, the leather so old it cracked like ice under her fingers. The pages, made of a thick, parchment-like material, were rough to the touch, and smelled faintly of ash and something metallic, like dried blood. It was not a book of words, but of names. A ledger of souls. She flipped to the final page, its surface strangely smooth. Jack's name was already written there, in the same elegant, unsettling script as the notes he had received, Jack Elroy. October 31st, 2025. Walked willingly, she ran a thumb across the ink. Still damp. As though the hollow itself had written it, inscribing its newest acquisition. She looked back at the previous entries, Sheriff Dane Mallory's name, scrawled beneath Lydia Vance's, and before that, countless others, stretching back through the centuries, each entry a testament to the town's grim survival. And there, a few pages back, was Matthew K. Elroy, his entry dated October 30th, 1992, with the same chilling notation, walked willingly. A lie, she knew, but a necessary one. The Hollow preferred willing participants, but would take what it was owed, regardless. Later that day, Mara returned to the library. Ashford Hollow was slowly, cautiously, waking from its Halloween stupor. The strange post-Halloween hush had fallen again, a quiet that was both a relief and a burden. The sky stayed gray, but the streets began to stir, children out on porches, though their laughter was subdued, shops lifting their blinds, radios playing soft jazz in kitchens that had held their breath for too long. She unlocked the archive door, the heavy oak groaning in protest. Inside, the usual scent of old paper and dust greeted her, a familiar comfort in the unsettling quiet. She sat at the desk, her gaze falling on a small, silver-gray digital recorder she'd found by the altar that morning. It was covered in a fine layer of ash, almost indistinguishable from the scorched earth. He had left it behind. A final message to a world that would never truly understand. She pressed play. The faint whirring sound was followed by static, then a tired, weathered voice. Jack's voice. If anyone hears this, I hope it's not too late. I came looking for the truth. Thought I was chasing ghosts. Turns out I was following a parade that never ends. A cycle of consumption. This town, it's a living grave. It feeds. And it will always be hungry. If you're listening, don't come looking. Don't try to understand. Don't try to break the cycle. Just leave Ashford Hollow alone. Let the dead keep walking. Let them keep the hollow asleep. It's the only way. His voice faded into static, then silence. A profound, echoing silence that seemed to stretch into infinity. She clicked it off. Her duty was to keep the records. To ensure the truth, however horrifying, was preserved, even if only for the next watcher. She opened a filing cabinet, pulling out a drawer marked Ongoing. She placed the recorder inside, among other forgotten artifacts, other whispers of the truth. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. Something personal. She opened her journal. Its cover was plain dark leather, its pages filled with her neat, precise script. October 31st, evening, the hollow slept. The parade passed. Jack Elroy made his choice. I watched it happen. I didn't interfere. I didn't beg him not to go. I saw Matthew Elroy too, just for a second, a flicker of recognition in the cold light of the lanterns. I think Jack did the right thing. He understood the cost. He accepted the burden. The others, they never look back. They simply walk, their faces blank, their purpose fulfilled. But Jack did. Even as he joined the line, even as the light consumed him, he turned his head, just for a moment. I think that matters. I hope it does. It means a part of him is still there. Still human. That night, Mara stood in her backyard, the cold wind whipping her hair around her face. She held a single, unlit candle, its wick waiting. 12 had burned the night before, placed around her small, overgrown garden, each one representing a soul taken, a life absorbed. This one, the 13th, she lit for herself. For those left behind. For the watchers. For the silent, enduring burden they carried. For the next watcher, whoever that would be, whenever the cycle demanded it. Because there would be one. Always. Epilogue. Elsewhere. A static-laced radio signal crackled in the dark, cutting through the late-night hum of a cheap motel room. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and loneliness. A man's voice, tired, weathered, with the gravelly cadence of someone who had heard too many strange stories, played through the tinny speakers of an old transistor radio. Welcome back to the Unsolved Hour. I'm your host, Henry Black. Tonight's caller left us something strange. A tape. No return address. Just a carved bird made of dark, heavy wood, tied to it with twine. The bird, it had 13 notches burned into its wings. Creepy stuff. We'll play it now, unedited. Make of it what you will. Just remember, folks, some mysteries are best left unsolved. A click. Then a moment of profound, echoing silence. Then, this is Jack Elroy. If you're hearing this, don't follow me. Don't come to Ashford Hollow. Don't try to understand. Just let the dead keep walking. The tape ended abruptly, replaced by the crackling static of the radio. Henry Black sighed, a long, weary sound. He reached for his coffee, then paused, his gaze fixed on the small, wooden bird sitting on his desk, its 13 notches dark and ominous. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand. It felt strangely slick, as if it had been dipped in oil. And cold. Unnaturally cold. He felt a shiver crawl up his spine, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He'd heard countless strange stories on the Unsolved Hour, but this one felt different. It felt real. Too real. He set the bird back down, a little too quickly. He reached for the microphone, his hand hovering over the on-air button. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some cynical, dismissive commentary, to reassure his listeners that it was just another urban legend. But no words came out. He just stared at the bird, its blank, wooden eyes seeming to stare back, watching him. And outside the motel window, the night was still and cold. Thank you for walking through Ashford Hollow with me. Remember, some stories don't end, they simply wait to be heard again. If the quiet of the night feels too still, or the shadows too long, just recall the 13th lantern, burning softly in the dark. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe to Bedtime Noir for more chilling tales to guide you to sleep. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? What time is it where you are right now? Drop a comment below and let me know. Rest well, and when you awake, may the parade stay far from your doorstep. Until next time, this is Bedtime Noir, wishing you a calm and haunted night.